If I remember correctly, this happened sometime around 2012 or 2013. I was in my final year of high school, or possibly my first year of university. During my senior year of high school, I was active in the school band. At the time, university entrance results were gradually being announced, and one by one, some of my friends were getting accepted into universities. So I was just going about my normal school life while staying busy with band activities. Then, by coincidence, one of the friends I played in the band with ended up going to the same university as me. I can't reveal his real name, so I'll call him Jayon. Jayon ended up going to the same university as me, but we weren't particularly close when we were in the band together. We had performed together from time to time. Whenever there was a school festival, we would occasionally go on stage together. But outside of band activities, we never really hung out. We never made plans to go anywhere together. We didn't regularly meet up after school. We were simply friends who happened to be in the same band. But once we found out that we were going to the same university, things changed. When you graduate from high school and start university, all your friends scatter in different directions. So even though Jayon and I hadn't been particularly close before, we already had a shared activity and knew each other. That became the starting point for us to become extremely close. Once winter break started in January, there was still some time before university began, and after January 1st came around, we had officially become adults. So, like everyone else at that age, we started going out drinking a lot, and Jayon and I became very close, very quickly. We spent a lot of time drinking together and talked about all sorts of things. What are you going to do once you start university? I'm going to find the prettiest girl among the freshmen and start dating her. I'm going to do this during my first year. I'm going to get this certification. We talked about all the things we wanted to do, but there was one thing we completely agreed on. We should join the band club again once we get to university. That was the promise we made. And eventually, we actually started university. Every school is probably different, but at our university, there was a specific period for student club recruitment. Around the middle of March, the clubs would set up booths near the athletic field or in front of the student union building. It wasn't exactly a festival. The clubs would come out, set up booths, offer various activities and experiences, and promote themselves in order to recruit new students. When that period came around, Jayon and I wandered around looking at the different clubs. There were pretty female students, various events, and all kinds of fun activities, so we were just walking around and checking everything out. But since we had already planned to join a band club, we were mainly looking at the band clubs. As we continued walking around and looking at the different clubs, a young woman and a young man approached us and started talking to us. "Excuse me, what kind of club are you looking at?" We replied a little awkwardly, "Oh, we're just looking at the band clubs." They said, "That's what we thought, so we wanted to ask. We're in a band club too. We're performing at the booth on the west side. You should come take a look." I felt a little suspicious at that point. Of course, every club has its own personality. But normally, band clubs don't really need to actively promote themselves. If a band is playing and singing, people naturally gather around to watch. So I thought, oh, this club is actually approaching people and trying to recruit them. It felt a little strange. Still, there was nothing for us to lose by watching a performance, so we followed them over. The performance wasn't continuous. They would play 2 or 3 songs, take a short break, and then perform again. During one of those breaks, they came over to us again and asked us something. And that's when I really started thinking, wait, this club is not very typical. They asked us, "Would you guys be interested in joining our club?" They were offering to recruit us right there on the spot, and I felt that was very unusual. Many of you watching may have been in bands yourselves. Normally, when you join a university band club, you have to audition. But we hadn't even auditioned. We had simply been watching their performance, and suddenly, they were asking us to join the band club. That was the moment I started feeling that something was seriously strange. I felt that something was off. I thought, there's something unsettling about this place. They hadn't properly auditioned us. And since there were several different band clubs at the university, I wanted to audition for a few of them and really find the right one. I wanted to join a band club, but I wanted to explore our options first. This is probably a good time to explain a little about Jayon's personality. Jayon had stage fright. He played the drums. When you're in a band, the drummer is usually positioned toward the back and off to the side, so he wasn't usually the center of attention when he was on stage. Simply getting on stage didn't make him particularly nervous, but if all the attention was focused on him alone, he would get extremely nervous. His hands would shake badly, and when he played the drums, he would often drop his drumsticks and make mistakes. That was the kind of person he was. So Jayon and I ended up having a disagreement. I said, "Didn't we come to university saying we wanted to perform a lot? Didn't we say we wanted to play at small concerts and get on stage often? Then shouldn't we audition and explore the different band clubs? Are you really going to join a club that doesn't even hold auditions?" That was my position. But Jayon said, "All band clubs are basically the same. Once we join, we're going to do the same kind of activities anyway. Is an audition really that important?" So we ended up in this situation. I wanted to explore more options first. Jayon wanted to join this club first and leave if it turned out to be strange. In the end, I gave in and joined the club. One of the things that changed my mind was the club's facilities. Of course, every university is different, but at our school, club rooms were assigned through an organization called the Central Student Club Association. The problem was that most university buildings weren't well soundproofed. The facilities were often old and outdated. There weren't many places where bands could properly play their instruments. And whenever a band practiced, complaints would often come in from nearby clubs or buildings. People would say, "Why are you making so much noise during class?" So the thing that really changed my mind was what they told us. We all work part-time together every semester. We also collect membership fees separately, and with that money, we operate our club in an external facility. We don't just have 2 or 3 guitars, a cheap keyboard, and a few basic instruments like an ordinary band club. We have 3 or 4 keyboards. We have 7 or 8 guitars, and we even have a separate recording booth. I know it might make me sound a little materialistic, but that really caught my attention, so I eventually agreed to join. And when we actually went to see the club room, the facilities were incredibly clean and well maintained. I thought, okay, maybe this isn't just some random amateur club after all. With that thought in mind, I started actively participating in the club. Then, about 2 or 3 weeks after joining, the club held a welcome party. We went to the club's welcome party. For those of you who went to university around 2013, you may remember that there was a bit of a culture back then. People would assign seats, mixing seniors and freshmen together. So there were about 20 or 30 of us sitting together, with a few freshmen mixed in among the seniors. We were drinking beer, playing drinking games, and having a great time. The atmosphere was loud and lively. Then, all of a sudden, everything changed. The mood became completely serious. I remember thinking, what is going on? Why did everyone suddenly go quiet? The seniors suddenly stopped talking. Their expressions became completely serious. Then, all of a sudden, they stood up. And they turned toward the entrance and bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. This wasn't like the joking expression young people use these days. We gave them an absolutely massive bow. No, they were genuinely serious. The atmosphere had completely changed, and they were bowing with complete respect at a perfect 90 degrees. I was sitting there awkwardly, thinking, is he someone who knows the club? Then the senior sitting next to me lightly nudged me with his elbow and gave me a look. Hey, what are you doing? Stand up, hurry. He's our club president. You're freshmen. Get up and say hello. Do you have no sense of what's going on? He started scolding us like that, so I awkwardly stood up and said, oh, hello. At that moment, I started thinking, wait a minute. I've been active in this club for 2 or 3 weeks, and I hadn't noticed anything like this before. Is this one of those clubs with a strict seniority system? Is there some kind of culture where they try to enforce hierarchy? That was what I started wondering. But while I was standing there awkwardly, the person who turned out to be the club president immediately said, Hey, what are you guys doing? How many times have I told you not to do this? I told you that if I became club president, the first thing I would get rid of was this kind of seniority-based behavior. I've told you this over and over again. So what are you doing this for? Sit down and let's just have fun. And just like that, the atmosphere immediately relaxed. After that, we never experienced that kind of atmosphere again. During the drinking session, we also heard about another club tradition. Our club goes to a factory that the club president knows during summer and winter breaks. We all work part-time there together. We contribute a certain amount from our wages. If any of our instruments break, we use that money to pay for repairs. We also use it for club operating expenses. And if there's money left over, we use it to volunteer at nearby nursing homes or orphanages. We perform and volunteer our skills. We do a lot of meaningful activities like that. That was the story they told us. I didn't really pay much attention to it at the time. After that, I continued participating actively in the club throughout the semester. We even performed at places like Dehangno from time to time. Then some time passed, and final exam season arrived. At university, summer vacation starts immediately after final exams. So once final exams came around, the topic that had come up during the drinking session started to become a real plan. We're going to work at the factory during summer vacation. Is there anyone who can't go? I had no particular reason why I couldn't go. I simply didn't want to. When I heard the details, they said that around 15 to 20% of our wages would be collected as club operating expenses. Those of you who remember that time will know what I'm talking about. These days, the minimum wage is close to 10,000 won per hour, but back then, it was less than 5,000 won. If I remember correctly, it was around 4,800 or 4,900 won per hour. So if you calculated it at 4,800 won per hour and worked 8 hours a day on weekdays, without things like weekly holiday pay, you wouldn't even make 1 million won a month. You'd make somewhere around 700,000 or 800,000 won. So if they took 15 to 20% of that, you were talking about roughly 150,000 won or more. And for a university student, 150,000 won is not a small amount of money. I also had my own plans. I wanted to work hard during the summer vacation, save all the money I earned, and then continue working part-time during the semester. I planned to combine that money and travel to Japan for 9 nights and 10 days during the winter vacation. So giving up 150,000 or 200,000 won wasn't an easy decision for me. I told them I wasn't going. But the club tried very hard to persuade me. They said things like, if you go back home and work there, you know how many part-time jobs don't pay their workers properly. But since this is a factory, you don't have to worry about not getting paid. Your current minimum wage is around 4,700 or 4,800 won. But we'll pay you 6,500 won per hour. If you work alone, it can be hard to stay motivated. You might quit easily. And you'll have to pay for transportation and food, so saving money won't be easy. But if you work here with us, accommodation and meals are provided. So it's easier to save money. And since everyone works together, you can motivate each other. It's a group trip with everyone from the club. How many memories do you think you'll make? They kept trying to persuade me, but I firmly refused. Jaeon, however, was easily persuaded. As you may have already noticed from the way he joined the club, he was the kind of person who was easily influenced. So Jaeon decided to go. I said, no, I'm absolutely not going. I'm going to save this money and travel to Japan. Neither of us could change the other's mind. So Jaeon went to work at the factory with the club, and I stayed behind. Jaeon and I had become extremely close during university, so we used to message each other constantly. We were always talking on Kakao Talk. It was the kind of friendship where we could message each other at any time of day. But once summer vacation started and Jaeon went to work at the factory, his response time became incredibly slow. Before that, we would sometimes message each other every 10 minutes. We were constantly in contact. But after he left for the job, I would send him a message and then wait 4 or 5 hours before he even read it. At first I thought, of course, he's working. It's probably difficult for him to check his phone. But as each day passed, the gaps between his replies became longer and longer. Then he would take 8 hours to reply. Sometimes he wouldn't read my messages for an entire day, and eventually I would receive a reply after 3 days. His tone also became extremely cold and formal. If I called him and said, "What are you doing?" "I'm bored. Let's talk for a little while," he would reply, "I'm tired from working. Let's talk later. I'll contact you again later." He kept responding like that, and eventually I started feeling hurt. To put it bluntly, I began to feel like, okay, I'm starting to get annoyed. Why is he suddenly treating me like this? I was genuinely upset. I was starting to feel a little hurt. I thought, when the semester starts again, I'll see him at school and give him a piece of my mind. With that in mind, I stopped contacting him and spent the rest of my vacation enjoying myself. Then the semester finally began. I packed my things and headed back to university. But even after I got back to school, I still couldn't contact Jayon. At first I thought, he'll probably contact me eventually. Of course he came back for the new semester. He must have registered for classes. But the next day came and I still hadn't heard from him, so I started wondering, why isn't he answering? I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. At first, I didn't think too much of it. I just thought, why isn't he answering his phone? But when I still couldn't reach him the following day, I started thinking, maybe I should actually try to find him. I contacted some of our mutual friends, but no one had heard from him. I kept asking around, trying to find someone who might know where he was. Eventually, I even contacted a friend from the club who had become somewhat close to Jayon. But when I called the number, I was told that it was no longer in service. That was when I started thinking, wait a minute. Something is seriously wrong here. Something strange is happening. The first thing I thought I should check was whether Jayon had actually registered for the second semester. So I went to his department office. Because Jayon and I had become so close, I had actually gone with him to his department office a few times before. So by the time I went there, I had already started putting together a theory in my head. I was thinking, maybe he had been upset with me about something. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to say anything. Maybe he had been keeping it all to himself. Maybe he's trying to cut me off. That was honestly what I was starting to think. So I went to the department office. I knocked on the door. Knock, knock. Come in. I walked inside. The teaching assistant immediately recognized me. Oh, you're Jayon's friend, right? He recognized me right away. I awkwardly said, yes, that's right. I actually came to ask about him. But before I could finish, he cut me off. I'm glad you came. Why on earth hasn't Jayon registered for the second semester? Right now, the department chair has placed him on an official leave of absence. But if this continues, he could eventually be expelled from the university. You need to get in touch with him as soon as possible. Tell him to change it to a regular leave of absence or do whatever is necessary. Please contact him and tell him to take care of his registration. That was what the teaching assistant said to me. I had gone to the department office to ask whether Jayon had registered, but I didn't get any useful information at all. After that, I went straight to the external club room, but when I arrived, the club room was gone. There was a "for rent" sign on the door. The room was completely empty. There wasn't a single piece of equipment or piece of furniture left inside. At that point, I immediately thought, something has gone seriously wrong. Now, I'm not trying to criticize or insult any particular profession. I'm simply describing what happened at the time. But back then, if a friend tried to report an adult as missing, the police wouldn't accept the report. And apparently, even when it came to adults, it could be difficult for relatives to file a missing person report. Especially if the person was a man in his 20s or older, he could simply be classified as someone who had voluntarily left home. So I had this strange feeling that something was wrong. I wanted to find out what had happened, but there was nothing more I could do. When I asked the police, they simply told me, just wait and see. They wouldn't even accept the report. I even thought about trying to contact Jayon's parents, but when I asked about their contact information, I was told, that's private information. We can't give that to you. So there was genuinely nothing I could do. No matter how close you are to a friend, it's not exactly common to have their parents' phone numbers, right? So I was completely powerless. I had a strong feeling that something was wrong, but I had no evidence, nothing concrete. And as time passed, Jayon gradually faded from my memory. I continued living my own university life. I eventually went to the military. I worked for a while. Then I returned to university. I even went to Japan to study abroad. About 3.5 years passed. Then I returned to university once again. It was around the end of March. I had recently started dating someone new. The cherry blossoms were in full bloom across campus, so my girlfriend and I were walking around arm in arm, enjoying a date. Then, from a distance, I saw someone walking toward us. There was something strange about him. Anyone would have thought there was something seriously wrong with him. He looked completely consumed by anxiety, constantly shaking his head from side to side almost every 2 seconds as he looked around, as if someone were chasing him, even though there was no one around who appeared to be watching him. It was March, yet he was wearing a mask and a hat pulled down low over his face. His appearance was strange, and the way he was behaving was even stranger. Naturally, I couldn't help but notice him, so I kept watching him as I walked forward. He was coming toward me from the opposite direction, and eventually we got close enough to pass each other. That's when I got a good look at his face. It was him, Jayon. I immediately grabbed him by the wrist and called out, "Hey, Jayon!" The moment he heard his name, his whole body started trembling. Oh. No, this isn't right. Why are you here? How are you? He couldn't even finish his sentence. His body was shaking violently, and then he started foaming at the mouth. He was having a full-blown panic attack, so I held onto his arms and legs firmly, applying pressure to help him calm down. Eventually, I managed to get him under control. Meanwhile, people around us were staring, wondering what on earth was happening. Once he had finally calmed down a little, I started questioning him. "What's going on with you? What happened to you? Why did you suddenly disappear without contacting anyone?" But he couldn't speak. So I told him, "Just put your phone number into my phone again. I'll call you later this evening. When I do, come out and we'll have a drink and talk about everything properly. You need to calm down first." After making sure I had his number, I let him go. That evening, I called him. Fortunately, he answered. I asked him to come out, and over a few beers, I finally heard what had happened to him. I finally learned what he had actually been through. He had gone to the factory job with the others. They had all traveled there together by bus. They traveled to a remote area in Gangwon Province. Now, most of us might know the general regions of Korea, Jeolla Province, Gangwon Province, and so on. But unless you actually live in a particular area, you don't usually memorize the names of every city and county in that province, right? So they kept going deeper and deeper into Gangwon Province. They passed through place names that he had never even heard of before. Then they went deep into the mountains. Eventually, they came across a building. That was the place where they were supposed to work. They were given an explanation of what they would be doing and were told that they would start working the next day. At first, because they had been told it was a factory job, he imagined operating machines and performing simple mechanical tasks. But it wasn't that kind of factory. There are old-fashioned factories that operate in a completely different way. People stand in a long assembly line. Person A performs a specific, repetitive action and passes the item to person B. Person B performs another specific action and passes it to person C, and so on. It is entirely manual work, with people standing in a line and making the product by hand. That was the kind of work they were going to be doing. The next day, they actually started working, but as soon as he saw what they were making, he started having questions. He couldn't figure out what the product was used for. He couldn't even understand whether anyone actually bought it. They were making these black plastic rods with holes in them. One person would tie a brightly colored string through one of the holes. Person A would tie a green string and pass it to person B. Then person B would tie a yellow string and pass it to the next person. They kept making products like that. Naturally, he was curious. What on earth is this used for? Does anyone actually buy this? Since they were all standing in a long line, he turned to the senior next to him. "Hey, senior, what exactly is this thing used for?" Normally, if someone asks you a question, you'd at least look at them. But the senior didn't even look at him. He just kept his eyes fixed on the floor and continued doing his assigned task, over and over, as if he hadn't heard a single word. He asked a few more times, but there was no response. Eventually, he started to feel awkward. He began wondering, why does this senior keep ignoring me? Did I do something wrong? So he stopped asking questions and simply continued working. But then, during a break, he went outside to rest for a while. The senior he had been working next to said to him, "Come with me for a minute." Since he was a smoker too, he assumed the senior wanted to have a cigarette together. But once they got outside, the senior said, "You probably don't know this because you're new, but you can't talk and fool around while you're working. Every manufactured product we make contains the blood, sweat, and effort of all the workers who made it. If you keep talking during work, defective products could be produced. Can you take responsibility for that if it happens? And these products contain the consciousness of all the workers who make them. So you need to maintain a reverent attitude. You have to keep your mind clean and pure. Even when you're making each individual piece, you need to do it with that mindset." He thought the whole thing felt a little strange, but the part about not producing defective products did make some sense, so he simply replied, "Oh, I see, I understand." From then on, he tried to avoid talking while he worked, and as a matter of fact, he later saw several other new students from his club try to talk while working. They were caught and harshly reprimanded by the seniors, so eventually, everyone began to understand. You really aren't supposed to talk here. Normally, even if you're doing difficult work, you can chat and joke around with the people around you. That makes the time pass more quickly. You don't even feel how hard the work is. But when you aren't allowed to say a single word and have to repeat the same assigned motion over and over again, it becomes incredibly exhausting, not just physically, mentally too. So when he returned to the dormitory, he would immediately collapse into bed and fall deeply asleep. That was why, at first, his replies to my messages had gradually become slower. After working like that for several days, he eventually went to bed and fell fast asleep. But while he was sleeping, he suddenly began to feel that something was strange. Why does this bed feel so uncomfortable? He opened his eyes. You know how your eyes don't suddenly open with perfect vision? When you wake up, your vision is usually blurry at first, and then gradually comes into focus. He slowly opened his eyes, but something about his vision was strange. Everything looked extremely blurry. So he thought, "What the hell?" and rubbed his eyes before opening them again. And when he looked, one of the senior members of the club was lying there with his face right in front of his, staring directly at him. They were only about one hand's width apart. He was so startled that he immediately started backing away on his butt and let out a loud scream. Naturally, the first thing he did was yell, "You bastard! What the hell are you doing?" But then he suddenly came to his senses. "Wait, I just cursed at my senior. But what exactly is going on right now? Is this a situation where I'm allowed to curse at him, or am I the one in the wrong for doing that?" He was completely confused. He had literally just woken up from a deep sleep. So he tried to calm himself down and asked, "How did you even get in here? Why did you come in? What are you doing?" But the senior didn't move at all. He just stared at him. Then he said, "You weren't sleeping. Why aren't you sleeping? Go to sleep. Go to sleep." He kept repeating those words like a parrot. The whole situation was so absurd that my friend didn't even know what to say. He just sat there staring at him in disbelief. The senior repeated the same thing 5 or 6 times. Then he stared at him blankly for a while before casually walking out. There was no explanation, no reaction. He simply stood there, stared at him, and then left. My friend naturally thought, what on earth was that senior trying to do? Why did he do that to me? Something about this is seriously suspicious. So he talked to some of the other seniors about what had happened, but their reaction was surprisingly casual. Oh, him? He's been famous for messing with juniors and trying to intimidate them for years. He seemed to have calmed down recently, but I guess he started again now that he's here. He did the same thing when he came here last year. They said it as if it were nothing unusual. Then they added, he can be a bit too much when he jokes around. We'll make sure to deal with him properly, so don't worry too much. But you were also wrong to curse at your senior. When you see him again, apologize for that. We'll make sure to talk to him about what he did. So he received something that was supposed to be counseling, I suppose, and after hearing that, he felt a little better. But once something like that happens to you, you can't sleep comfortably anymore. Every time he went to bed, he kept wondering whether that senior might come back and do something again. So he decided to conduct a little experiment. Those of you who remember that period may know this, but smartphones back then weren't like the ones we use today. They were basically first-generation smartphones. The batteries could still be removed, and unlike most phones today, they still had headphone jacks. So he plugged in his earphones, set an alarm, and went to sleep. He decided that he would wake up in the middle of the night and test whether that senior was actually doing something while everyone was asleep. So he set an alarm for around 3 or 4 in the morning. When the alarm went off, he didn't immediately get up. Instead, he simply moved his eyes around and looked around the room, but no one was there, fortunately. So he thought, maybe that was just some stupid prank. He felt relieved. He got up, opened the refrigerator, and took out a bottle of water. Then he started looking for a cup. He couldn't find one easily, so he turned on the light, poured himself some water, and took a drink. And then, without thinking, he happened to glance to the side. And there, outside the window, someone was staring at him. It was that senior. He was standing outside the window, looking directly at him. At that moment, all the suspicion he had been carrying suddenly turned into certainty. This wasn't just a prank. That senior had really been watching him. My friend was furious. At that point, he didn't care that the man was his senior anymore. He just started cursing at him. Since the window was closed, the senior probably couldn't hear what he was saying. The man was saying something too, but my friend couldn't make out the words. Still, he could tell what the senior was saying just by watching his lips. Why aren't you sleeping? Go to sleep. Go to sleep. He kept repeating the same words. My friend said he didn't even need to hear him anymore. He already knew exactly what he was going to say. So he got even angrier, opened the window, and started shouting every swear word he could think of. You crazy bastard! What the hell are you doing? But even after all that, the senior didn't react. He simply stood there, repeating the same words over and over again. Then, just like before, he quietly turned around and walked away. After this happened for the second time, naturally, my friend became extremely stressed. He barely slept that night. The next day, he went to work exhausted. And in a remote mountain village like that, there wasn't much you could do to relieve stress. The only thing he had was a cigarette. So during every break, he went outside to smoke. The place where they smoked was behind the buildings. You had to walk between the dormitory and the factory, turn around a corner, and go to the back of the building. There was a small area there with a single metal drum where they could smoke. As he walked down that passageway, he began to hear voices. At first, he could make out about 4 or 5 different people talking. Since several people were already gathered there, he suddenly felt a little awkward about walking in and joining them for a cigarette. So he hesitated. Should he go in, or should he just wait until they left? But then, he heard another voice. One more voice had joined the conversation. There were now 6 people, and the voice that had just been added was the voice of the senior who had been staring at him through the window. Then he heard the senior's voice. Wait, why is he here? He hadn't intended to eavesdrop. He had simply happened to hear them, and before he knew it, he found himself standing there, listening in. But the conversation began to take a very strange turn. Hey, how's it going with that guy? Are you making any progress with him? With some of the new people who came in this time, things seemed to be going pretty smoothly. But that guy, Since the friend's name was Jayon, let's say they had given him a nickname. For convenience, we'll call him Pultegi, so they started referring to him by that nickname. Some of the new guys are coming along nicely, but Pultegi is so suspicious. It's hard to work on him. I don't understand why he's so suspicious when it looks like there's a lot we could get out of him. Anyone listening to that conversation would have felt that they were talking about him. He stayed still and continued listening. But then the conversation became even stranger. There is a certain urban legend that came to mind at the time. I can only think of it as a similar example, the so-called ghost helicopter. Yes, something along those lines. Now, they never actually mentioned anyone's name directly in the conversation, and they never explicitly mentioned any particular body part or anything like that either. But the conversation was heading in a direction that inevitably made him think of something along those lines. After hearing that conversation, there was no way he could continue working there comfortably. He stood there silently, not even smoking the cigarette he had come out for, and thought deeply about what he had just heard. Until now, I thought that guy was just playing some kind of prank on me. But maybe this isn't a prank at all. Maybe there's something going on involving him and the others bullying the new people. Maybe they're trying to do something illegal. After thinking it over, he finally made a decision. I can't keep working here. So he went to the club president to talk to him. He told him everything that had happened and said, I don't think I can keep working here anymore. At first, the club president listened sympathetically and seemed to understand what he was saying, but then he started trying to persuade him to stay. He said things like, if you leave now, you're going to lose a lot of your pay, and continued giving him various reasons to stay. And, well, as you probably remember, my friend was very easily persuaded. So once again, he gave in to the persuasion and decided to stay. After that, he quietly started walking back toward the dormitory. You know how people sometimes do this when they're walking home? Especially if you live in an apartment or some kind of building, you might look up at the windows and think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why is my apartment light off? Why is my light on? People do things like that without even thinking about it. So he looked up toward the dormitory and saw that the light in his room was on. But after everything that had happened to him, seeing that light immediately made him think of something terrible. So he quietly went up to the dormitory and gently pressed down on the doorknob. If you apply pressure to the doorknob while turning it, you can open the door without making much noise. He opened the door just a crack and looked inside. And there were 2 people in the room doing something. One of them was holding one of the rods they had made and pressing it against the bed, moving around as if he were dancing while rapidly muttering words that sounded like some kind of dialect. So he watched them, thinking, what on earth is that guy doing on my bed? What are they doing in my room right now? Meanwhile, the other person was wandering around near the refrigerator. He suddenly muttered an insult to himself, then opened the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and started injecting something into it with a syringe. Anyone could tell that what was happening was illegal. At that moment, my friend thought, I have to get out of here. I changed my mind and decided to stay, but I have to leave this place. That was when he finally realized something. Far too late. The information I told the club president when I went to him for advice must have been passed on to them. The president was in on it. They were all part of the same group. I'll explain later why my friend didn't report it immediately. For the time being, he quietly closed the door again, thinking that he couldn't let them know he had seen anything. He waited outside for a long time, then quietly went back inside and pretended to sleep. He decided that he would wait until the middle of the night, get up again, and escape. He left all of his belongings behind and took only the things he considered essential. As he quietly made his way out, nothing seemed unusual while he was walking through the hallway, but the moment he stepped outside the building, his body suddenly froze. The club seniors were standing in a straight line, while the new members were kneeling in a line in front of the building, sitting with their hands clasped behind their backs. Then they started saying things like, "Get back inside, hurry up and go back inside. We've already begun the ritual to meet him, and you've ruined the entire plan just by showing up now. You're supposed to go meet him too, so where do you think you're going?" They kept saying things that made absolutely no sense, so they ended up in a standoff. He thought, I can't just go back inside because they're telling me to. But if I try to run away, there are 20 or 30 people here. They'll obviously catch me. He tried to stall for time while thinking through his options. Eventually, he decided that he had to run. He turned around and started sprinting, and after that, he has no memory of what happened. He was caught almost immediately. When he opened his eyes, he realized he was tied up in his own dormitory. You know those old-fashioned beds that have a post sticking up from each corner? His arms and legs had been tied to the posts. After a long time had passed, one of the seniors came into the room. He removed the gag from my friend's mouth and said, I know this is frightening because you've never experienced anything like this before, but this is all part of a ritual to meet him. We all have to meet him. When we meet him, we'll experience the ultimate pleasure. We all have to go and meet him. He continued preaching some kind of incomprehensible doctrine. Then he said, You're not ready yet, and left. Several hours later, he came back. But during that time, something had happened. My friend had developed severe stomach pain, but with his hands and feet tied up, he couldn't go to the bathroom. So, inevitably, he ended up relieving himself on the bed. When the senior returned and saw what had happened, he broke into a huge smile. Finally, you've completed the first step toward meeting him. To meet him, spiritual purification is important, but physical purification is just as important. We have to get rid of all the bad things inside our bodies before we can meet him. Then he untied my friend's hands and feet and told him to go take a shower. The moment he was being untied, my friend had been thinking, once I'm free, I'll take him down somehow and escape. But after being tied up for several hours, his muscles had become so stiff that he could barely use his strength properly, so he couldn't even think about overpowering anyone. When the senior told him to take a shower, he started walking toward the bathroom. Then the senior suddenly said, Wait, look at you. This is medicine that cleanses your soul. He gave him some kind of liquid and told him to drink it before going to wash. After my friend showered and came back out, the bed had been completely replaced. Everything was clean. Then they made him lie down again and tied his arms and legs back up. And this process continued for several days. While lying there, my friend eventually realized, wait, that liquid they gave me, it must have been a laxative. That was the purpose of it. The process continued for 2 days, then 3 days, then 4 days, and eventually, he began showing signs of severe dehydration. By the 3rd or 4th day, he had barely eaten anything, so even when he had diarrhea, there was no longer any real color to it. It was basically just water. And when they saw that, they finally said, Good, the physical purification is complete. But that day, they didn't send him into the shower. Instead, they told him to put on a particular outfit. It was very colorful, almost like a traditional Korean outfit. They told him to put it on and follow them. When he stepped outside the room, there were 5 or 6 other new members standing in a line. They were all wearing the exact same clothes. Then they began walking. They went up into the mountains. The mountain wasn't a normal hiking trail. It was one of those paths that had naturally formed because people had walked over the same spot so many times. They followed that path up the mountain until they reached an area with a single tree. The surrounding grass had been cut down, so the place looked almost like a small clearing. Then the seniors told them, This is our sacred tree. You've finally come face to face with the one we worship. Hurry up and bow deeply. Do it with a reverent heart. They said they were going to perform a ritual for the tree. The seniors surrounded it in a circle, holding the poles they had made themselves, and began performing what looked like some kind of dance while chanting strange words. It was almost like a ritual version of Gangang Sulai. Then they told the newcomers, You have to do this too. And if anyone refused, they were beaten. They spent several days being trained in these rituals. After that, they finally came back down the mountain. But that day, they weren't sent straight back to the dormitory. Instead, they were told, Today, you're going to meet the club president. The atmosphere in the room was stifling, thick with the scent of burning incense and the murmurs of incomprehensible prayers. The man who had once been their president was now a vessel for something darker. With a gentle, unsettling smile, he looked toward my friend and whispered, "We are nearing the threshold. To reach our God, we must be cleansed. The physical form is a vessel of impurity. The stomach, the intestines, the filth of this world, all of it must be surrendered before we can ascend." As he spoke, my friend felt the weight of the concealed object against his palm. He realized then that the moment had arrived. The man's eyes were distant, lost in a vision only he could see, utterly oblivious to the reality closing in on him. My friend did not hesitate. He drew the jagged, broken piece of the ritual rod, the serrated edge catching the dim light of the room. The contrast was jarring. The man's calm, prophetic sermon met with the sharp, cold reality of retribution. With a surge of adrenaline, he lunged forward. The air in the room seemed to shatter. In that moment, all the suppressed rage and the months of forced deception erupted at once. He struck out with the hidden weapon, the act driven by a desperate need to tear through the president's terrifying delusion. It was a chaotic, visceral moment where the lines between the ritual they preached and the violence my friend unleashed became indistinguishable. The man's sermons died in his throat, replaced by a sudden, jagged silence. As the figure collapsed, the silence that filled the room felt heavier than any prayer. But since it was plastic, obviously it couldn't really hurt anyone. It just caused an incredible amount of pain. He used it to overpower the man and said, "Bring me your phone." "Where did you hide my phone?" "Actually, you don't even have to bring me my phone. Just tell me where your phone is." He made the man bring him his phone, completely subdued him, and then escaped. He went up the mountain, the same mountain they had always climbed for their ritual training. As he later told me, there was one place on that mountain he had always kept an eye on. You know those places where a rock juts out slightly, creating a small space underneath where you can hide from the rain? A rock overhang, I guess you could call it. It wasn't a large space, but he had thought, if I squeeze myself into that spot, I might be able to hide my entire body. So he went there, broke off some branches, covered himself with dirt, and camouflaged himself as best he could. And sure enough, almost immediately, he heard people chasing after him. Their footsteps came right up to the area where he was hiding. Find him. Where did that little bastard go? And the phone. He brought the phone with him, right? Call him. Hurry up and call him. He was terrified that they were going to find him. Just before they could discover him, he urgently turned off the phone. But before turning it off, he had managed to send a desperate text message to someone. Since you can report an emergency by text message, he sent a desperate message along the lines of, "I'm somewhere in Gangwon province. I don't know the exact location. I'm being kidnapped and held captive. Please save me." After sending it, he waited. A little while later, he heard the people searching for him give up and walk away, but he was too terrified to come out immediately, so he continued hiding. Then, after some time, he began hearing footsteps again. Rustle, rustle. He thought, what do I do? Have they found me? But then he heard something else, the sound of a radio, a police radio. And at that moment he thought, I'm saved. The police had arrived. That was how he finally escaped. And of course, after going through something like that, he reported everything to the police. But the investigation hit a dead end. Even after the police investigated, they couldn't find any real leads, and the case made no progress. My friend's uncle was also a police officer. He wasn't in the criminal investigation division or anything like that, but he was still part of the police force and naturally had some connections. So the family tried asking around through those connections as well. But even then, the investigation went nowhere. And about a year passed. After everything he had been through, my friend developed severe psychological problems. And honestly, after experiencing something like that, it's understandable. He developed something like an anxiety disorder after everything that happened. It was inevitable, really. The people there knew everything about him, so he was constantly afraid that they might come looking for him or do something terrible to his family. Naturally, he moved to a different place. He changed his phone number and took other precautions as well. But even after doing all that, he was still so anxious that he practically shut himself away from the outside world and lived in near total seclusion. Naturally, he spent most of his time shut inside, watching a lot of television. Then one day, he was watching TV when a news report about a cult came on. The story was about a mother who had fallen under the influence of a cult and had sacrificed her own 3-year-old daughter. He thought, "What is this?" So he kept watching. And as you probably know, news reports like that often include reenactments of what happened. The reenactment was brief, a flickering image on the screen that lasted no more than 2 seconds. It was meant to be a background detail, a silhouette of 2 people, bound and restrained. But for my friend, those 2 seconds were a lightning strike. As he stared at the screen, the breath hitched in his throat. He knew them. He recognized the way they stood, the fabric of the garments they wore, the specific posture of their submission. "That's them," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Those are the people. I was there with them." He immediately brought this to his uncle. It was the break they had been waiting for. After a year of dead ends and cold trails, they finally had a path forward. Most people who remember the headlines from 2014 know exactly which religious group dominated the news cycle. The infamous organization that held the nation's attention and sparked endless, painful investigations. It became a byword for systemic corruption and cult-like devotion. But my friend's revelation cut deeper. The group he had escaped was not the one the nation was watching. It wasn't the group plastered across every front page. It was a phantom organization operating in the periphery, a group that called itself the Sinrioknamu Church. While the world's eyes were turned toward the high-profile scandal, the Sinrioknamu Church was weaving its own web, hidden in the blind spot of public consciousness, harboring the same rot, but far more dangerous because no one even knew they existed.